You're listening to School Leadership Reimagined, episode number 29.
Welcome to the School Leadership Reimagined podcast, where we rethink what's possible to transform your school. If you're tired of settling for small wins and incremental improvement, then stay tuned to discover powerful and practical strategies for getting every teacher in your school moving towards excellence. Now, here's your host, Robyn Jackson.
Hey builders, welcome to another season of School Leadership Reimagined. I'm your host, Robyn Jackson, and this is season 3 of the show. So this season, the theme is really about comparing the difference between builders and between leaders. And so each week we're going to look at some aspect of your job as a school administrator or as a coach, and we're going to look at how leaders handle it and the challenges that come with handling it that way. And then we're going to look at how builders handle that challenge. So today we're going to start off the season by talking about how to handle teacher complaints like a builder. But before we dive in, I have some really amazing news. You see, several people told me that they really wanted to attend Builders Lab 2019, but they couldn't get away from their schools for 3 days during the school year. And we've heard that complaint before, and so finally we decided to do something about it. So I talked to my team, and we decided that we're going to be offering 2 Builders Labs over the summer. So the first one is happening June 24th through 26th, 2019 in Palm Springs, California. Now, this is a great event if you're a principal or assistant principal or a district leader who supports administrators, because we're going to be spending 3 days together developing the 4 disciplines of buildership. So you're going to learn how to upgrade your feedback so that teachers not only welcome your feedback, but they immediately act on your feedback and use it to significantly improve their practice. And then you're going to find out how you can differentiate your support for teachers so that you're meeting teachers where they are. And get this, you're going to do it without creating a bunch of extra work for yourself. So you're also going to learn how to help teachers be more accountable to your core values, your vision, your mission, and how to help teachers take more ownership over their own practice. And you're going to learn how to overcome toxicity in your culture and create a school culture where every single adult in your building is working together for student success. At the end of our 3 days together, you'll know exactly how to overcome pushback, how to get all your teachers committed to your school vision, and how to create a school culture where everybody takes ownership over their practice and everybody works together to live out your vision and your mission for your school. Now, we're also doing something else really cool. You see, we heard from a lot of instructional coaches who have said, can you create something that's just for us? Because quite frankly, there just isn't a lot of really good training out there that's focused on the unique challenges that instructional coaches face. So we have created Builders Lab, the Coaches Edition. I know, so exciting. This workshop has all the things that people really love about Builders Lab, but with a specific focus on instructional coaches. Because as a coach, you're really kind of out there on your own. You're in the middle. You don't really have the positional authority that an administrator has, so you can't compel teachers to act on your feedback. And you're not really seen as a part of the team with the administration in your building. So you're under pressure to produce results, but without sometimes the supports that you need to be able to do it. And so that's why we've created Builders Lab, the Coaches Edition, because we want to be able to directly address the unique challenges that coaches face. So you're not only going to learn how to provide teachers with feedback, support, accountability, and culture, you're going to learn how to get teachers to invite you into their classrooms and trust you to walk alongside them in their practice. You're going to learn how to provide the right kind of follow-up support that really gets teachers moving, even if those teachers were initially kind of not receptive to your support. You're going to learn how to manage your principal so that he or she sees you not just as a last resort to work with the worst teachers in the building, but as a real member of their team. And you're going to learn how to tap into the unique power that you have in your position as a coach to really influence the culture. And so by the time we've completed our 3 days together, you're really going to be ready to go back to your school and be a change agent. We're going to spend some time talking about that. How can you be a change agent as a coach? And you're going to be able to have a huge impact on the teaching and learning in your school. So if you're interested in either of these events, Builders Lab, which is happening in June, and then Builders Lab, the Coaches Edition, which is happening in July, go to www.mindstepsinc.com/builders-lab. That's www.mindstepsinc.com/builders-lab. And get your tickets today for either the Builders Lab or Builders Lab, the Coaches Edition. And then get ready to discover how to get everybody who works in your school or in your district on board, working together towards your school goals. So again, that's mindstepsinc.com/builders-lab. And I'll also make sure that I put a link to that in the show notes. Okay. So today kicks off season 3 of School Leadership Reimagined. And this season is all about the difference between being a leader and being a builder. And the reason why I wanted to do a whole season on this topic is because most of us were trained to be leaders. And yet our training, it fails us sometimes especially when we're facing any situation that's kind of outside the normal. For instance, our training tells us how to give feedback, and it works great with a teacher who welcomes feedback and who wants to improve. But what about that teacher who doesn't believe they need to improve? They don't see anything wrong with what they're doing. Or what about that teacher who takes our feedback too personally and they start, they break into tears in our post-observation conference? Or what about the teacher who calls the union on us every single time we give them feedback that they don't like? A training doesn't really show us how to deal with that. And we've all been trained to put together professional development opportunities for teachers. And when teachers want to be trained, it works great. But what happens when we have some teachers who really need support in one area and we have other teachers who really need support in a different area? What are we supposed to do then? Or what about teachers who are already really good and they're bored at the trainings that we provide? Our leadership training doesn't really teach us how to differentiate or support teachers who are at different levels. What about teachers who they sit through the PD training, but they don't actually implement what they learn in the classroom? Again, our leadership training really doesn't show us what to do about that, how to get teachers to actually take what they've learned in PD and implement it in their classrooms. Here's another way that leadership training fails us. We've all been trained on accountability and looking at data and improvement. But what happens when teachers get overwhelmed with all of our new initiatives and they start to shut down? Or what happens when we look at data and determine that we're behind? Our training as leaders doesn't really address this very much. And it's almost as if our training expects everything to work perfectly every single time. But it doesn't always work perfectly. Sometimes teachers push back. Sometimes students' needs change. Sometimes cultures shift. And that's when our training, our leadership training fails us. And then what? What are we supposed to do then? And that's the biggest difference between what we were taught to do as leaders and what we learned to do as builders. You see, our leadership training operates in a very narrow realm, and it's really focused for, dealing with people under ideal circumstances. But outside of those very narrow ideal circumstances, it fails us. Buildership, on the other hand, anticipates challenges. It's not reactive. It's proactive. It helps you prepare for what's coming, and it helps you handle whatever it is like a builder. Leaders react, but builders anticipate. When things don't go as planned, leaders they work harder, but builders, they don't work harder, they adjust. Leaders muscle through challenges, but builders transform their challenges into new opportunities. So this season, we're going to look at some of the specific situations that you may be facing right now, and we're going to compare how you were probably trained to handle them as a leader and how you probably should handle them as a builder. And so this week, we're going to tackle a situation that comes from a question that someone sent me on LinkedIn. And by the way, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, we really need to be connected. So make sure that you find me. I'm Robyn Jackson at Mindsteps on LinkedIn. And so find me and let's connect, because that's a great way for us to continue the conversation from these podcasts after the podcast is over. Anyway, this listener writes, okay, what do you do about a staff that is never satisfied? They complain about something and I fix it, but it's still not enough. I've done everything for my staff and they still aren't satisfied. Well, it's a pretty common issue, unfortunately. I mean, you want to move your staff forward, but they complain about some obstacle that's in their way. Maybe you want them to create more rigorous lesson plans, for instance, but they complain that they don't have the time to plan, or maybe you want them to collaborate more and do more cross-curricular lessons, but they complain that they don't have enough common planning time, or maybe you want them to differentiate more, but they complain that they don't know how, or they don't have the resources to be able to do that. And so you give them the extra time. You revise the schedule to create common planning time. You give them really top-notch training on differentiated instruction, and then nothing. Nada. I mean, nothing changes. It's just business as usual. Have you ever done that? Have you ever bent over backwards to try to support teachers and they still aren't satisfied? Well, it may not be your fault. You see, the way that we've been trained as leaders is to identify the challenge that people are facing and then remove that challenge. As leaders, we're problem solvers, right? But the problem is that a lot of times we go out of our way to make things easier for teachers and things still don't change. And what's worse, the teachers aren't happy. They complain about something, you fix it, and I'm using air quotes here for fix, you fix it, and they're still not satisfied. And so we either blame ourselves and we work harder and harder trying to win them over, or we blame them and accuse them of being ungrateful and lazy. But really, neither one of these explanations is actually true. There's something else going on underneath the surface that, if we understood it, would help us meet teachers' needs in a way that keeps them motivated and empowered to do the work that we ask of them. And that's what builders understand from the very beginning. And that's why, frankly, builders don't waste time bending over backwards trying to meet the demands of teachers or students or parents, because oftentimes when you are just jumping and reacting to meeting those demands, you don't get appreciated for it. And in fact, you end up with more complaints down the line. So today we're going to talk about how builders handle complaints versus how leaders handle complaints. And much of the information I'm going to share with you today comes from a guy named Frederick Hertzberg. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He has a theory called the motivation hygiene theory. And I'll try to link to his Harvard Business Review article in the show notes, but they may have put that article behind a paywall by now. So if they did, I'll still link to it in case you want to buy the article, but I'll also try to link to another article that kind of spells out his motivation hygiene theory, because it's really, really interesting. And one of the things that I found most interesting is that he introduced something called the two-factor theory. And that's the idea that the factors that produce job satisfaction are separate and distinct from the factors that produce job dissatisfaction. So what that means is that just because you remove the things that make people dissatisfied with their job, it doesn't mean that once you remove those things, people are going to suddenly be satisfied. In fact, if you eliminate those things that produce job dissatisfaction, well, you might stop hearing the complaints, but you won't necessarily change somebody's job satisfaction or their job performance. In other words, the opposite of job dissatisfaction is not job satisfaction. It's no more dissatisfaction. This will be more clear as we go throughout this episode, but it's really a fascinating theory. And I think it really underscores why when you go and you put out a fire and you solve a problem for people, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're saying, oh, now I'm satisfied with my job. What he is saying is that they're two different things. Just because I'm no longer dissatisfied does not automatically mean that I am satisfied. So let's go back to the way that leaders typically deal with complaints so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so has someone ever come into your office and complained about something and then your stomach immediately knots up? or you start to get immediately stressed out. I mean, this used to happen to me all the time. I used to hate it when somebody came into my office to complain. I dreaded it. It was like the worst part of my day. And so what leaders do is they allow that complaint to upset them, to create stress and pressure. And that's because when somebody complains, leaders immediately feel the pressure to do something about it. So they get to work trying to solve the problem. And sometimes that means changing a policy or slowing down our initiative or backing off something that they were pushing to get done. And then after they make that change, they expect that teachers will now do the work that they're asking them to do. But a lot of times, even though they gave teachers exactly what they said they wanted, teachers are still not happy, which leads the leader to conclude that the teachers are whiny or that they're ungrateful, and they get really frustrated because they see that there's nothing that they can do that will make teachers happy. But here's a mistake with that way of thinking. Just because you solve somebody's dissatisfaction with their job doesn't mean that your work is done. I mean, hardly. What builders know is that there's another step, that if you want to make sure that teachers experience real job satisfaction, you just can't remove the thing that they're complaining about. You do have to remove that issue, but you also have to build the elements that create job satisfaction. So just removing things that cause just job dissatisfaction, it's not enough. So what builders do is builders know that typically the things that cause job dissatisfaction, when you really get down to it, they're usually based on things like district policies, or the person feels that they're being micromanaged somehow, or there's something off in the relationship that the complainer has with either you or with their peers, or the complainer's work conditions aren't conducive to success, or they feel like their status or security is being threatened. It's usually one of those things that's at the root of any complaint. So what builders do is that whenever they're presented with a problem, they ask themselves, the following series of questions. They want to know, okay, does a teacher need me to adjust an unfair policy? Would that solve the problem? Or do I need to allow teachers more ownership and responsibility? Maybe will that do it? Or is this really an issue where I need to repair our relationship or take a look at some of the relationships that are happening in the building? Or is this an issue where I need to make working conditions more conducive for success? Is there something in the working conditions that are keeping them from being successful that I can do something about? Or is it just that they're feeling threatened, either by their status or security? And do I need to remove that threat somehow so that people can trust me and they can feel like they're safe here in this school and in this building? At the end of the day, all complaints really get down to one of those things. So what builders do is they don't just jump in and address the problem. They look for the root cause of a teacher's dissatisfaction, and then they deal with that root cause. So as you see, if you've been listening long enough, builders always go to the root cause. They don't just respond right away or react even. What they do is they get to the root cause first. So let me give you a for instance. Sometimes teachers complain that they need more time for grading and planning. I hear this a lot. So this is a pretty common complaint in schools. So here's what leaders do. Leaders will start moving heaven and earth to give teachers, 30 extra minutes per week of extra planning time, or, find some way to give teachers more planning time. And then they do that, and teachers are still not satisfied. They're still saying it's not enough time. And then they wonder, okay, I just moved heaven and earth for you. Why are you not grateful? But builders, before they do anything else, they dig a little deeper. They ask themselves the question, do teachers want more planning time because they're grappling with a policy that's taking their time and energy away from what they really want to be working on? If that's the case, giving teachers more planning time isn't going to solve that issue because the policy still exists. Or is it that teachers need more planning time because they feel that their time is being micromanaged and they're looking for more freedom? Just giving them an extra 30 minutes, but micromanaging those 30 minutes won't solve the problem. You've got to deal with their feeling of control and ownership if you're going to solve the problem. Do teachers want more planning time because they crave more interaction with each other and opportunities to collaborate? In that case, 30 minutes a week, distributed throughout the week, it's not going to be enough. Do they want more planning time because they're being bogged down by their working conditions and they just need a break? So in this case, they don't even want more planning time to plan. They just want more breaks in the day. And so the extra 30 minutes may not solve that problem. Maybe teachers want more planning time because of some policy or some initiative feels very threatening to their status or independence. So they're pushing back and trying to regain some control over their practice. Again, 30 more minutes isn't going to solve the problem. So builders dig first. They ask themselves these kinds of questions before they react to a teacher complaint. And that's because there are all kinds of reasons why teachers may want more planning time. And if you just jump in and jump to a solution right away and without delving into the root cause first, you run the risk of giving teachers exactly what they ask for without really meeting their needs. But builders don't just stop there because they know that just because you remove the cause of dissatisfaction doesn't mean that you have built job satisfaction. You actually have to do something. You have to be deliberate about building job satisfaction and true motivation. So yeah, while you do need to understand why teachers are dissatisfied and get to the root cause of their dissatisfaction and actually address it, builders know that that's only half the battle. The other half of the battle, and I would argue the most important half of the battle, is that you must also do things that fosters people's job satisfaction, that builds their motivation. And it's here that builders really, really shine. You see, leaders try to motivate teachers too, but usually leaders try to motivate teachers by making them feel better about their work without actually making the work more satisfying. They just try to convince people that this boring or monotonous or micromanaged job that you're doing, it's not as bad as you think, and you can like it, and they try to convince teachers to feel better about the work. They never change the work. The way to make teachers' work more satisfying is to give them more opportunities to feel successful in the work, or to give them recognition for the hard work that they're doing, or to give them more interesting work. Or how about increasing their responsibility and their ownership so that they feel like they are in charge of their own work? Or how about giving them more opportunities to advance and grow? Builders aren't just sitting in their office all day swatting complaint after complaint after complaint. They're proactively and intentionally designing a school environment where teachers can find real meaning in their work and see real results for their students. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. Suppose we start a new grading policy, and I hear the groans, and it requires that all teachers give students opportunities for reassessment. Now, this actually happened to me on a couple of different occasions where the grading policy changed. Okay, so that new policy is going to require more work from teachers who have to design a good assessment, then design a different good assessment for reassessment, find time to remediate students, reteach, and then reassess, and not to mention grade the new assessment in addition to all the other grading that they already have. So it is going to be more work. And here's what a boss would do. A boss would deny that it's any more work for teachers, or they'll dismiss teachers' concerns that it's more work. Y'all are just whining. It's not more work. This is the work you should be doing anyway. That's kind of how a boss handles it. Here's what a leader does. A leader will actually try to convince teachers that although it is more work, the additional work is worth it. And then they'll offer teachers a rousing pep talk about, how this is the right work to be doing because after all, it's for the kids. Well, if that guilt trip doesn't work, then leaders will employ what Hertzberg calls the KITA method. And KITA, K-I-T-A, stands for kick in the, and I can't say the last word on this podcast, but you can fill in the blank. So leaders are going to use a KITA method. So first they're going to try to convince you, it's a lot more work, but do it for the kids. It's the right thing to do, and guilt you into it. And then if that doesn't work, leaders will make it a school-wide or a district-wide policy, and then they'll check and they'll chase and they'll punish people who don't comply. And they'll spend all their time trying to enforce the policy. And the problem with either the guilt trip or the KITA strategy is that both require constant reinforcement, and both strategies really focus on short-term results. Builders don't do that. Builders do things differently. You see, builders understand that You never motivate people by giving them more work or even ways to manage their work differently. You don't motivate people that way. The way you motivate people is by freeing them up to do the right work and make that work intrinsically rewarding. So what builders would do is first they would look at ways they can free teachers up to focus on the right work. So are there current policies that need to be reexamined, or are teachers working on old initiatives that the district and the school has long since abandoned, but they forgot to tell the teachers? And so teachers are still doing stuff that people don't really care about anymore. And that happens more often than you think. Maybe there's some busy work that doesn't make a measurable difference in the lives of students, but teachers are expected to do it anyway. So the builder's going to get rid of all of those things. So not only do teachers have more time to do the important work, but teachers have more time to be engaged in work that matters and that's interesting and meaningful for them. But that's not all. You see, instead of spending time trying to sell the new grading policy, builders are going to engage teachers in understanding why there's a need for the policy and developing ways to integrate that policy into their work in ways that make sense. They're going to focus on the design of the work itself and get teachers really involved in designing how that new policy will be implemented and how it can be integrated into the work that they're already doing on behalf of students. Builders are going to highlight where teachers have successfully implemented the policy in the school. They're going to be giving teachers feedback and support to help them get better at designing and delivering good assessments that help more students be successful the first time, so you never have to reteach and reassess to begin with. And they're going to show teachers how to design really good reteaching and reassessment loops that quickly get kids on track. And their goal isn't just to implement a new policy. Their goal is to leverage the new policy so that they can practically eliminate student failure and every student is meeting or exceeding rigorous learning goals. In other words, builders find ways not only to decrease the dissatisfaction with the new policy, they also find ways to make the new grading policy more satisfying to implement for teachers. So teachers implement the policy not because they're afraid of punishment or because they fear failure. They implement the new grading policy because they see value in it and they actually want to do it. That's the difference between leaders and builders. Leaders hear complaints and they try to address job conditions or quickly solve the problem just so that they can get the complainer off their backs. And I understand it. I get it. I understand the impulse too. And if you only have the tools and the skills that you're taught in leadership training, that makes a lot of sense. But I want you to know that there is another better way. You see, when builders hear complaints, they are not stressed out at all. Instead, they're just listening for the root cause. And then they address the real problem, not the symptom that people bring to them, but the real root cause, the real reason behind the complaint. And they're not only just addressing the issue in the complaint, they're also working to make teachers' jobs more rewarding and satisfying so that teachers are internally motivated to do the best that they can possibly do on behalf of kids. So if you feel like you're constantly on the hamster wheel trying to please teachers who seem never to be satisfied with anything that you ever do, get off. You don't have to fix everything, and you shouldn't even try because a lot of times what people are complaining about isn't even the real problem. Instead, recognize that if you want your teachers to feel motivated and satisfied with their jobs, there are actually two things that you need to do. One, you need to uncover the source of their dissatisfaction, and you've got to address that. And two, you need to look for ways to make their jobs more satisfying so that you build on teachers' internal motivation to do what's best for children. Do that, and you will soon be handling complaints like a builder. Now, before we go, don't forget to get your ticket to Builders Lab. If you want to find out how to get your people on board and moving so that you can have a successful school year, even the resistant naysayers or the people who are just plain stuck, you need to come to Builders Lab. And we have two happening this summer. One is Builders Lab, and that's for administrators and instructional coaches and district leaders. And the other one is Builders Lab, the Coaches Edition. And this one is just for instructional coaches. And you can sign up and get your ticket for either of those events by going to mindstepsinc.com/builders-lab. That's mindstepsinc.com/builders-lab. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to be connected on LinkedIn. Now, a lot of you have connected, and that's great. We have great conversations. But if we're not connected yet, I want you to go to LinkedIn and find me. I'm Robyn Jackson, and let's connect. Also, I'd love to know what you think about the podcast. Would you please go to iTunes and leave me an honest review? Not only would it give me incredible feedback, it actually helps other people find this podcast. And if you're not sure how to do it, if you've never left a review on a podcast before, if you go to this episode's page, schoolleadership.com/episode 29, there's a link there that will walk you through the entire process. And if you've really been served by this podcast, if you find the information valuable, would you share this podcast with somebody else who might also find it valuable? I would count it as a personal favor if you would. All right, let's talk about next week, because next week is kind of juicy. You see, we're going to be talking about the difference between the way that leaders and builders hold teachers accountable. In particular, we're really going to look at what happens when a teacher violates a boundary or doesn't follow through on something that they were supposed to do. How do you handle it when a teacher crosses the line? Well, you'll have to tune in next week, where you're going to find out how to hold a boundary like a builder.
Thank you for listening to the School Leadership Reimagined podcast. For show notes and free downloads, visit schoolleadershipreimagined.com. School Leadership Reimagined is brought to you by MindSteps, Inc., where we build master teachers.